Carter had been looking forward to this flight for days. After working a grueling 36-hour shift at a busy Austin hospital, she finally allowed herself a few hours of rest. She boarded the plane quietly, grateful for her window seat in row 8. The hum of the engines and the faint scent of recycled air created a strange calm that washed over her as she slumped into her seat. Around her, families chatted quietly, some children fidgeting in excitement, others glued to screens. Flight attendants moved down the aisle with practiced efficiency, smiling and reassuring passengers, their voices a comforting hum against the drone of the plane. Adjusted her neck pillow, tucked her arms around it, and slipped her headphones over her ears. She had planned this moment, her small, personal escape. She closed her eyes, letting the soft jazz playlist she had downloaded lull her into a light sleep. The last thing she wanted now was stress or medical emergencies. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a mundane journey from Denver to Miami. She could hardly imagine that the ordinary could so quickly turn extraordinary. 2 hours in, sleep was light and dreamy. Outside, clouds scudded past the small window, painting abstract patterns against the fading blue of the afternoon sky. Cabin announcements floated by, mundane reminders about seat belts, safety, and beverage service, but barely registered them, lost in her private world of drifting thought and exhaustion. She imagined herself lying on a sandy beach in Miami, warm sun on her face, nothing but peace surrounding her. Her heartbeat slowed, her breaths deepened, and she felt the comfort of letting go after so many days of non-stop hospital chaos. Then a sudden sharp chime echoed through the cabin. Eyes flew open, heart thumping. Something in the tone was off, not the usual routine alert. She lifted her headphones just as the captain's voice, trembling and tight, filled the intercom. "If there is a doctor or nurse, please come forward immediately." Silence followed, only broken by whispered confusion. People looked around, some puzzled, some suddenly alert. Stomach dropped. The words weren't casual, they carried a weight of urgency she couldn't ignore. Her training kicked in instantly. All the exhaustion, the soreness in her limbs, the quiet longing for a few more hours of sleep, none of it mattered. She unbuckled, smoothed her uniform, and moved toward the front. As she passed rows of passengers, she caught snippets of frightened conversations. "What happened?" an elderly woman whispered. "Is it the pilot?" A man held his child close, as if trying to shield the small boy from fear he couldn't explain. His pulse quickened. She could feel the collective anxiety in the cabin pressing against her like a physical weight. Flight attendants cleared a path, their expressions tight but professional. "This way, ma'am," one said, guiding her down the aisle with gentle urgency. Boots clicked on the floor as she moved faster, her own thoughts racing. She had faced trauma in hospitals countless times, cardiac arrests, multi-car accidents, overdoses. But she had never faced anything like this, not here, not 30,000 feet above the ground, with hundreds of lives literally depending on the next few minutes. Her hands tingled, the nerves of adrenaline firing through her. Reaching the cockpit's worst fears crystallized. The captain was slumped forward, gray and still, his head resting on the console. The co-pilot, barely 29, stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief, hands trembling over the controls. Panic clawed at the edges of focus, but she forced it down. Her training was now her shield. This man needed her, needed a miracle that only her skills could provide. Kneeling beside him, she whispered almost to herself, "I've got you." Every eye in the cockpit, every passenger back in row 8, depended on what came next. The calm, ordinary flight was gone. A crisis had arrived, and Carter, just a sleeping nurse in row 8, was about to become the lifeline between life and death at 30,000 feet. Heart pounded as she steadied herself beside the captain. The co-pilot, pale and shaking, fumbled with the radio. "Mayday, mayday, Captain, unresponsive, need immediate assistance." His voice wavered, betraying panic, blocked it out. Panic would do no good here. Every second counted. She placed her hands on the captain's chest, pressing firmly, rhythmically, just as she had countless times during cardiac emergencies in the ER. Only this time, there were no hospital walls, no monitors, no backup team. Only the two of them, the unresponsive pilot and the aircraft humming 30,000 feet above the ground. Her palms burned as she counted compressions in her mind. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm of life. She ignored the tremor in her knees and the sweat sliding down her temple. The co-pilot hovered uncertainly nearby, glancing at her for instruction. "Airway," said, motioning to the oxygen kit. He obeyed, hands shaking, setting up the mask. She adjusted the captain's head, making sure it was aligned. Had trained for emergencies, but never like this, with a plane full of passengers above her and no hospital waiting below. Time stretched and warped. Minutes felt like hours as continued compressions, counting silently, mentally revisiting every step she had learned. The captain's skin was cold and his lips tinged blue. The co-pilot glanced out the cockpit window, seeing clouds swirl violently around them. "We're losing altitude," he muttered, panic rising again. Ignored him. She was hyper-focused on the only thing she could control, keeping the man alive. She leaned closer, whispering, "Stay with me. Just a little longer." Her voice was firm, a lifeline tethering him to the world. The plane rocked suddenly as it hit turbulence, the faint lurch sending coffee cups spilling in the cabin and screams echoing faintly through the cockpit walls. Felt the metal floor shift beneath her knees but held her position, chest compressions unbroken. Each push carried all her energy, every ounce of skill, every memory of a life saved before. She glanced at the co-pilot, whose knuckles had gone white gripping the controls. "You're doing it right," she reassured him. "Just keep us steady. That's all I need." A faint flicker under her fingers made her stop. Could it be? She leaned in closer. Yes, the pulse. Weak, erratic, but unmistakable. Relief coursed through her, but she didn't allow herself a moment to breathe. She needed him stable before landing. She signaled the co-pilot to keep the aircraft steady. "Ground control, we need an immediate emergency landing," he stammered, radio static buzzing. "We have an unresponsive captain, medical professional, requesting priority landing." Adjusted the oxygen mask over the captain's face and whispered encouragement. She had to maintain focus. His life depended on it. The co-pilot's hands shook visibly but noticed a spark of determination. "You're doing it," she said again, gripping the pilot's shoulder. The captain's pulse was returning, slow but steady. Sweat stung her eyes, but she refused to wipe it away. She could feel every heartbeat, every tremor in his body. The engines roared, turbulence rattled the cockpit, but became a calm center in chaos. She mentally counted compressions, breathed instructions to the co-pilot, and adjusted oxygen flow, all while imagining every possible worst-case scenario and mentally countering it. She remembered her father's voice from years ago during her Air Force medic training. "Courage is control under pressure. You don't wait for calm, you create it." She repeated it to herself silently. Her arms burned, but adrenaline kept her going. Row 8, the aisle, the terrified passengers, they didn't matter now. Only the man before her mattered, only the rhythm of her hands, only the thin, fragile pulse she had restored. This was no longer a flight, it was a battle against death in midair. As the plane leveled slightly, whispered, "Hold on, Captain. We're not done yet, not by a long shot." The co-pilot nodded shakily, eyes glued to her hands, silently trusting her expertise. Somewhere back in row 8, passengers whispered prayers, unaware of the drama unfolding mere meters from the cockpit door. Didn't hear them. She had one mission, one goal, to keep a man alive until the ground could save him. The captain's pulse thumped faintly beneath his fingertips, weak but alive. Relief surged through her, but there was no time to celebrate. The plane was still 20,000 feet above the ground, engines roaring, turbulence rattling the fuselage. She kept one hand on the captain's chest, the other adjusting the oxygen mask, her mind racing with calculations and contingencies. Every movement had to be precise, every second counted. She could feel the co-pilot trembling beside her, his knuckles white on the yoke. "Keep him steady," she whispered. "I'll handle the rest." His voice was calm, almost eerily so. She had trained for emergencies, yes, but this was unlike anything she had imagined. Life and death 30,000 feet above ground, surrounded by strangers with the entire aircraft depending on her hands. The co-pilot glanced at her nervously. I don't know if I can do this alone," he admitted. Shook her head, voice firm. "You can. Just follow my instructions. Keep us level, keep calm, and I'll keep him alive." He swallowed hard, nodding, gripping the controls with renewed focus. The plane shuddered violently. Outside, clouds collided in chaotic swirls, slicing through sunlight with sharp edges of gray. Inside, felt the tremor travel up her legs and arms as she pressed compressions, keeping her rhythm steady. She counted in her head, 1, 2, 3, always 3. Her muscles burned, sweat stinging her eyes, but she ignored it. She leaned closer, whispering, "Stay with me, Captain. You're stronger than this. Don't leave us now." Her voice became a tether, connecting him to life. In the cabin, tension was palpable. Passengers murmured, some holding hands, some praying silently, others frozen in fear. No one could cease heroics, but the collective anxiety pressed like a physical force against the cockpit walls. She could hear faint sobs, nervous laughter, and a baby crying somewhere behind her. Yet she blocked it all out. Every second mattered. A wrong move now, a pause too long, and the man she had already pulled back from the brink could slip away again. Checked the captain's airway, ensuring it remained clear. The oxygen mask hissed softly, delivering life-giving breaths to his struggling lungs. Her arms shook with fatigue, but she refused to stop. She thought of every patient she had lost and everyone she had saved, letting the memory sharpen her focus. She counted compressions, recalibrated the mask, monitored the faint pulse. Microseconds of hesitation could be fatal. Above her, the plane continued to hum and lurch, a reminder that gravity, altitude, and chaos were all relentless opponents. The co-pilot's radio squawked with the tower. "Dallas emergency, this is Flight 417, Captain unresponsive, medical professional requesting priority landing, ETA 30 minutes. Nodded. "Good, keep flying steady, focus only on landing, I'll manage him until we touch down." She pressed compressions harder, faster, her arms screaming. Sweat streamed down her face, dripping onto the captain's uniform. Her own exhaustion loomed like a shadow, but adrenaline and sheer willpower kept her going. Row 8, her seat, her life of normalcy, it was gone. She was fully in the storm. Then it happened, a faint flutter beneath her fingers, the pulse, weak, irregular, but undeniably there. Relief flashed through her, sharp and sudden. She didn't allow herself a smile. There was still work to be done. The captain's vitals were fragile. One wrong move could undo everything. She murmured to him softly, words only he could hear. "You've got this. We're not done yet. Hold on." The co-pilot watched, all mingling with fear as maintained life amid chaos. His mind was a storm of calculations, memory, and instinct. She adjusted oxygen, monitored pulse, and kept a hand firmly on the captain's chest. The plane rocked again. "Almost there," she whispered to herself. "Almost there." Every heartbeat she could feel under her palm was precious. Every breath was a victory. She was no longer just a passenger, no longer just a nurse. She was the lifeline keeping life tethered to a man who had moments ago flirted with death, all while a plane full of strangers hurtled toward the earth. The plane pitched violently as turbulence slammed against the fuselage. Felt the metal floor shiver beneath her knees, but she didn't flinch. Her hands remained pressed firmly on the captain's chest, her focus absolute. Around her, alarms beeped and warning lights blinked, the cockpit a chaotic symphony of danger and urgency. The co-pilot gritted his teeth, eyes wide as he fought to stabilize the aircraft. Leaned closer to the captain, whispering, "We're not done yet. Stay with me. Focus on breathing, one step at a time." Every word, every touch was a lifeline. The oxygen mask hissed softly, delivering life-saving breaths to the captain. His pulse was fragile, irregular, but it was there. Arms ached, muscles screaming, yet she refused to stop. She recalibrated the mask, monitored his airway, and adjusted her compressions to match the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, clouds twisted violently, the sun barely breaking through the storm's gray veil. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot's hands trembled on the controls. "We're diverting to Dallas," he announced, voice tight with tension. Nodded, pushing aside fear. The plan was simple: survive until the ground could take over. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the passengers were gripped by rising panic. Drinks sloshed in cups, a baby screamed, and nervous whispers filled the aisles. Some clutched the armrests, others held hands in silent prayer. Nobody understood the drama unfolding mere meters from their eyes, but could feel it. The collective anxiety pressed like a tangible force. She blocked it out, drawing deep, steady breaths. Her focus was absolute. The captain's life depended entirely on her skill, composure, and unrelenting determination. This was no ordinary flight. It was a battle against death itself. The co-pilot glanced at, fear and admiration mingling in his eyes. I'm not sure I can do this," he admitted, shook her head firm. "You can. Follow my lead, focus on the landing, and trust me with the captain. That's all you need to do." He swallowed hard, gripping the yoke tightly. Every lurch of the plane sent tremors through the cockpit, threatening to knock her off balance, but anchored herself with sheer willpower. The world narrowed to the man under her hands, the rhythm of her compressions, and the urgent need to survive. Minutes stretched endlessly, each second feeling like a lifetime. His mind raced with memories of every patient she had saved, every life she had fought for in the emergency room. She pulled strength from those memories, letting them guide her hands, her voice, her resolve. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over, a mantra against panic. She could feel the faint pulse strengthen, subtle but present, a flickering flame against the darkness of cardiac arrest. One wrong move now could undo everything, yet she remained steadfast, calm, and precise. The plane tilted sharply as it entered a descending approach, braced herself against the cockpit walls, compressions unbroken. "We're almost there," she murmured, voice steady despite the chaos. Outside, the runway lights of Dallas appeared, shimmering like beacons of hope through the storm. The co-pilot adjusted the throttle, following her instructions without hesitation, maintained her rhythm, adjusting oxygen and pulse checks in perfect coordination. She felt every beat beneath her fingers, as if the captain's life was now physically intertwined with her own. A sudden lurch caused to stumble slightly, but she steadied herself immediately. The cabin trembled, passengers gasping as the descent intensified. Whispered encouragement to the captain, speaking softly yet firmly, "You're safe. Almost there. Don't give up now." The oxygen mask hissed, compressions continued, pulse remained weak but present. Outside, storm clouds swirled with increasing violence, yet inside had carved a bubble of calm. She was the tether between life and death, keeping the captain alive until the plane's wheels could touch the runway. The runway lights drew closer, the aircraft shaking with each gust of wind. His heart raced in sync with the captain's fragile pulse. The co-pilot's face, pale and strained, showed traces of relief as he followed her guidance. Leaned closer, whispering with conviction, "Just a little longer. We're almost home." Every muscle ached, sweat dripped into her eyes, but she held firm. At that moment, the storm outside was irrelevant. All that mattered was life, survival, and the fragile heartbeat she had nurtured at 30,000 feet. The runway lights of Dallas grew larger, shimmering like distant fireflies through the storm-laden sky. Arms burned with every compression, her legs trembling on the metal floor of the cockpit. Outside, the plane pitched and swayed in violent turbulence, lightning illuminating the clouds in jagged streaks. Yet inside, her focus remained laser-sharp. One hand stayed pressed firmly on the captain's chest, the other monitoring the oxygen mask. "You can do this," she murmured to him, her voice calm yet urgent. "Just a little longer, stay with me. We're almost home." The co-pilot's knuckles whitened as he gripped the controls. His voice wavered. "I've never landed under conditions like this. I don't know if I can," glanced at him sharply. "Yes, you can. Trust me, follow my lead, focus on the runway, that's it. Nothing else." He nodded, swallowing hard, taking a deep breath. The storm lashed against the fuselage, rattling overhead bins and sending a few unbuckled items tumbling to the floor. Passengers screamed, but blocked the chaos, centering herself on the life trembling beneath her hands. Every breath the captain drew was shallow, uneven. Adjusted the oxygen mask, recalculated the compression rhythm, and leaned closer, whispering encouragements. "You're strong, you're alive, keep going." Her arms ached, muscles burning like fire, but she refused to yield. Row 8, where she had been asleep hours earlier, no longer mattered. She was no longer a passenger, she was the lifeline, tethering a man's life to the world below. Each pulse she felt, each faint breath, reminded her that time was precious, and she could not falter. The co-pilot's voice broke through the tension. Flaps are down, gear is down, we're aligned with the runway. Nodded, signaling him to maintain altitude and speed. She continued compressions, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm, steady and unwavering, became a heartbeat in itself. Sweat streamed down her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't pause. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, briefly revealing the co-pilot's terrified, pale face. He trusted her completely, following instructions word for word. Yet it was who carried the true burden of life and death. The plane shuddered as it pierced a strong gust. Passengers screamed, clutching armrests and each other. Could hear the distant, fearful prayers, the whispered pleas, and the sobs of a child. She ignored them. Nothing else existed except the captain's pulse under her hands, the oxygen mask delivering life, and the landing that could save him. Her hands were raw, fingertips pressed firmly against his chest. "Almost there," she whispered, every word infused with hope and determination. The landing gear hit the runway with a loud screech, sparks briefly flashing beneath the plane. The fuselage shuddered violently, bouncing once, twice. Screams erupted in the cabin, followed by tense silence. Didn't relax. She maintained compressions, adjusted oxygen, and checked the captain's pulse. The co-pilot's hands shook, but he kept the plane steady, slowing to a complete stop. Engines whined, then settled into a low hum, exhaled slowly. The captain's pulse was stable, weak, but present. They had made it. Against all odds, life had survived the sky. Paramedics swarmed the plane the moment the doors opened, guided them carefully, explaining the situation with precision. "Cardiac arrest, regained pulse after 8 minutes, patient still fragile," she said. The captain was lifted onto a stretcher and his hands finally relaxed. Her legs quivered, exhaustion crashing down, but she stood tall, watching him being wheeled into the waiting ambulance. The co-pilot exhaled a long, trembling sigh, visibly relieved. The passengers erupted into applause, some crying openly, none fully grasping the miracle that had just occurred. Remained in the cockpit a moment longer, leaning against the control panel. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her body aching, yet a sense of calm satisfaction settled over her. She had done it. Row 8 had given birth to courage, skill, and determination at 30,000 feet. Lives had been saved. Chaos had been conquered. And Carter, who had simply been sleeping hours earlier, had become the lifeline between death and survival. The plane had come to a full stop, but its work was far from over. She pushed herself to her knees as paramedics stormed into the cockpit, their equipment clanging against metal floors. "Cardiac arrest, pulse regained mid-flight," she reported quickly, her voice calm but urgent. "He's stable for now but fragile. Keep the oxygen steady and continue monitoring vitals." Her words were concise, professional, each syllable conveying the urgency of life hanging by a thread. The captain, unconscious but breathing, was still tethered to the world solely by her hands. The co-pilot exhaled shakily, looking at with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I've never seen anyone handle something like this," he admitted. Gave a small, tired nod, wiping sweat from her brow. Her legs were trembling, her arms raw, but she didn't allow herself a pause. Each second still mattered. She had just guided a human life through the chaos of altitude, turbulence, and panic. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest as strongly as the fatigue, yet she stayed upright, grounded by instinct and training. Paramedics lifted the captain carefully onto a stretcher, followed closely, giving instructions. "Monitor blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen. Don't remove the mask. He's stable for now but still at high risk." One of the paramedics looked at her incredulously. "You're a doctor," shook her head, voice firm. "Flight nurse, emergency response." The paramedic blinked in disbelief, then nodded, immediately following her lead, guided them through the chaotic cabin, ensuring no patient detail was missed. The passengers watched, some clapping, some in silent awe, still processing the near catastrophe they had been unaware of just moments ago. Outside, the media had already arrived. Camera lights flickered through the open doors of the aircraft, reporters shuffling to capture the unfolding miracle, ignored the flashing lights. Fame and recognition were secondary to the task at hand. She concentrated on the captain's fragile life, on the details of vitals and oxygen, on ensuring that the man she had fought for above the clouds could survive the next crucial hours. Row 8, the seat she had once occupied in peaceful sleep, had become the epicenter of heroism at 30,000 feet. Finally, with the captain safely aboard the ambulance, straightened and took a deep breath. Her muscles ached, her lungs burned, and sweat streamed down her face, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the air. She had done what many would have thought impossible, sustained life in the impossible environment of a mid-air cardiac emergency. Passengers, now gathered in the terminal, whispered her name, calling her an angel, a hero. Simply nodded, tired yet resolute. She had saved lives, and that alone mattered. The airline representative approached cautiously, eyes wide. "Ma'am, we can't thank you enough. That was incredible," managed a tired smile, brushing damp hair from her face. "I did what anyone trained would do," she said softly. The words were modest, yet her presence radiated the authority of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. She glanced back at the ambulance, feeling a quiet, profound relief. The captain was alive. The passengers were safe. She had carried them through a storm they would never forget. Hours later, sat quietly in the hospital waiting area, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Her uniform was still damp with sweat. Exhaustion pulled at every joint and muscle. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the night sky dotted with stars, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just ended. She reflected on the events, the turbulence, the racing heartbeat, the passengers' silent prayers, the impossible responsibility that had fallen onto her shoulders. It had been surreal. A doctor approached with a smile. "He's stable, awake, and will be fine. He specifically asked to thank you," the doctor said. Chest tightened and tears pricked her eyes. She hadn't sought recognition, but hearing that someone's life had been saved because of her felt indescribable. She had turned row 8, her small and unnoticed seat, into the of a battle between life and death. And she had won. Hours had passed since the plane had touched down, yet Carter still felt the adrenaline buzzing through her veins. She sat quietly in a hospital waiting area, sipping a lukewarm coffee, trying to process everything. Her uniform was damp, her body exhausted, but her mind raced endlessly. She kept replaying the sequence of events, the captain collapsing, the co-pilot frozen in fear, the turbulence, the sound of engines, the prayers she hadn't heard but somehow felt from the passengers. The memory of holding a life in her hands at 30,000 feet was still vivid, almost surreal. Outside the waiting room, the murmur of media and hospital staff filtered in. Reporters had already arrived, cameras flickering like fireflies. Her story had spread through social media and emergency channels before she had even taken off her flight boots. Passengers had whispered her name, row 8 nurse, angel in the cockpit, and the news crews were gathering details. Ignored them. Fame was not what she sought, yet part of her felt a quiet, satisfying pride. She had done what was needed. The rest would follow on its own. A doctor appeared with a smile that carried relief and gratitude. "Captain Hayes is stable, awake, and asking to see you," he said. Blinked, emotions washing over her. She had no idea what to expect, but relief surged in her chest. She followed the doctor, her legs still trembling from the hours of standing, kneeling, and performing life-saving compressions. She had expected a simple thank you. She hadn't imagined the depth of gratitude she was about to encounter. In the ICU, the captain lay in bed, pale but smiling faintly. "I owe you my life," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Knelt beside him, feeling the immense gravity of the words. "You did what anyone trained would do," she replied softly. Yet she knew he was speaking the truth. Without her, he would not have survived the 8 minutes that could have ended everything. Her hands, once raw from compressions, still tingled from the strain of holding life in her palms. The co-pilot appeared quietly, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I didn't think I could have done it without you," he admitted, shook her head. "We did it together," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. It was a team effort, yes, but she had been the anchor. The thought of every passenger, every whisper of panic, every prayer, surged through her memory. Row 8 had been transformed from a simple seat into the epicenter of courage, skill, and survival. Later, sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, the adrenaline finally subsiding. Her hands trembled and tears blurred her vision. She reflected on the passenger's fear, the co-pilot's panic, the captain's fragile pulse under her fingertips. For hours, she had been the line between life and death, a responsibility so immense that it had felt surreal. She realized that Row 8 had changed her. She was no longer just a nurse. She had become a symbol of courage and calm under pressure. News reports began streaming in. Social media buzzed with videos of the emergency landing, passengers, reactions, and eyewitness accounts of a heroic nurse who had saved the captain's life. Glanced at her phone, hesitant to read. She had never sought attention, never craved recognition, yet the world now knew her name. Row 8, the seat she had dozed in hours earlier, had become a legend. She smiled faintly, reflecting on the strange irony. A simple nap had turned into one of the most consequential shifts of her life. As night settled over Dallas, thought about the passengers she had indirectly saved, the captain she had directly saved, and the co-pilot she had guided. She felt a deep, quiet satisfaction that no applause or media attention could replicate. Row 8 was no longer just a seat. It was a testament to courage, to skill, to resilience. And Carter, the ordinary flight nurse, had transformed an ordinary flight into an extraordinary story of survival, hope, and unwavering human determination. Weeks had passed since that fateful flight, yet Carter's mind replayed every second. The routine of hospital life resumed, but the memory of the captain's collapse at 30,000 feet, the turbulence, the screaming passengers, and the roar of the engine stayed vivid, like a film she could never turn off. She found herself recalling the beat of the captain's fragile pulse beneath her fingertips, the way his chest had risen and fallen, and the sound of the co-pilot's voice trembling yet steady as he followed her instructions. Row 8 had become more than a seat. It had become a symbol of life itself. Her mailbox contained a single envelope that had arrived that morning. It was thick, hand-addressed, and unmistakably personal. She tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten letter from Captain Hayes, the man whose life she had saved above the clouds. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate, every word carefully penned. Read the opening line and felt her heart skip. "Because of you, I got to meet my granddaughter." Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading, each sentence more powerful than the last. "You kept me alive long enough to hold her in my arms, to see her first smile, to tell her stories about life and courage. I cannot thank you enough. You are my hero and my family's hero. Row 8 will always be our reminder of the courage, skill, and determination you showed when it mattered most. I hope someday I can meet you in person to express my gratitude fully. Until then, know that you changed my life, and the lives of everyone on that plane, forever." His hands trembled as she held the letter to her chest. She sank into her chair, overwhelmed by emotion. Fame had never been her goal. She had trained, learned, and served because saving lives was her calling. Yet now she understood the full weight of what had happened. Row 8, once an ordinary seat on an ordinary flight, had become the epicenter of a miracle. She had been the thread keeping a man's life tethered to the world, and the gratitude she held in her hands was proof of that. Her thoughts drifted back to the cockpit. The chaos, the alarms, the co-pilot's fear, the turbulence that had threatened to undo everything, and the faint flicker of a pulse that had returned under her hands. She remembered whispering to the captain, encouraging him to fight, to stay alive. It had worked. She had guided him through a storm at 30,000 feet, and he had survived. And now, through the simple yet profound words of a man she had saved, she realized that life had a way of circling back, of reminding her why she had chosen this path. Smiled softly, thinking of the passengers, unaware of the miracle that had unfolded mere meters from their seats. She thought of the co-pilot, the paramedics, the flight attendants, and the countless others who had played small but essential roles in the drama above the clouds. Courage had taken many forms that day, but hers had been the anchor. Row 8, where she had been sleeping, had become the stage where ordinary skill met extraordinary necessity, where calm met chaos, and where life prevailed against impossible odds. That night, as she looked out the window of her apartment in Austin, reflected on the strange turn of fate. A nap, A routine flight, a moment of crisis had combined to create a story she would carry forever. Captain Hayes' letter rested on her nightstand, a tangible reminder of life, courage, and purpose. She understood now that being ready, being trained, and being calm under pressure wasn't just a skill, it was a responsibility. Carter, the woman who had been sleeping in row 8, had become the lifeline between life and death. She had transformed fear into courage, chaos into order, and helplessness into action. And as she held the letter close, she whispered quietly to herself, "This is why I do what I do." Life had called her name midair, and she had answered with skill, determination, and heart. Row 8 would never be the same, and neither would she.